Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Gen Z iOS code. So if your SwiftUI view looks like these with a lot of @states variables, this video is for you. So this is what I call the boolean loop, right? Basically having an spaghetti of all the different states we have in our app. So we're going to start with this messy app that you see right here, and then we're going to clean it up to make it more scalable, more good looking, and better architecture, right? So let me show you what this is, right? So this is just the profile app. So basically when you go into it, right, as you can see, you see a little text saying tap the button to load the profile. And then basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to load a profile for the user, right? So the initial state will be these. You just have a text saying, hey, tap the button to load the profile. And then we're going to have a button to actually load the profile. That button, when you trigger it, it'll load. And then when it loads, then by the end of it, you can have different states, right? So you can have an empty state, meaning no profile was found, or you can have an error state where you actually got an error and we want to show that error to the user, right? So as you can see, we're managing those states with @state variables in our view. So basically we're saying as an initial state, we default saying true. And then we're saying, we have one for isLoading, we have one for, has errors. So we have to set it to true, and then we actually set the error message, right? So we have one for isEmpty, meaning we didn't get any profile, and then we have one for the profile, right? Profile name, which is nullable because it starts nil. We have no profile, and then if we succeed trying to get the profile, then we actually set it, right? Then I'm going to show you the view really quickly. So here's the spaghetti, right? We just have a VStack, really nice with some formatting, a little bit of a padding, a background, and then inside our VStack, basically, and it's a VStack because sometimes you'll have more than one component. Like here we have, two views. So that's why I made it a VStack. So we basically have to go through and check every single boolean, right? We have to keep track of all of them and check them. So we're saying if it's in the initial state, we're going to have this text, right? Tap the button to load the profile. If it's loading, we're going to show a progress view. If it's if we actually have a profile name, right, we're actually going to say hello and then the profile name. If it's empty, we're going to say no profile found and an SF symbol. This content on a readable view is just something that SwiftUI has. That's, a very simple view where you can pass in a text and an SF symbol. And it shows really nicely. And then we're going to check, if it has errors, and then we're going to have that content on a readable view again, saying something went wrong and then an SF symbol. And then we're going to actually show the error message, right? Now, the problem with this, right, as you can see, you have to keep track of all the states, right? So we have different states, the initial, the loading, the error state, the empty, right? And then the actual state that we have a profile. So all these states, you have to keep track of all the booleans. And every time you have something, so let's say you're loading, now you have to set the isInitial state to false and then change the isLoading. Now you finish loading, or let's say you have an error. Now you have to set the isLoading to false again. And then you have to so you have to, keep track of like every single variable, right? So that, all of them have the correct value. And that's very bad, right? That's not scalable at all. And as you, build the app and do a lot more, that's going to get unmanageable, right? It's just going to be too many. It's going to just become an spaghetti in your code, right? So let me show you how I have that button. So that button, I just have it, in the save area. Inset, I put it in the bottom. So basically that's what makes it show right here. And then I just basically have that button. We're calling this load profile function that I'll show you right now. And then we just have, a text with some formatting. So that's this button right here. So basically, that's all we have, right? With the load profile function. So I have it as a private func in our view. So basically, the first thing we're going to do, right, when we tap the button, the each initial state, we set it to false because we're not in initial state anymore. It's loading. We set it to true because we're going to start loading, right, to fetch the profile. And then everything else, I just, set it to the default just in case. Because here's the thing, you need to keep track of all these variables. So maybe this one had a value, maybe this one had a value, because maybe you can load the profile multiple times. So on the second time you're loading it, you have to reset, right, the error. Maybe the first time it gave you an error, so you have to reset it. You have to make sure you reset it. So maybe you forget this, and maybe, you already had you had an error from before, so you have to make sure, you update it really neatly. So yeah, keeping track basically of every single variable. That's what you got to do. doing it in this way, right? Which, well, we don't want, and I'll explain the better way in a second. So then now we're just, starting a task, and that's because we're going to use this task to sleep for 1 second. So basically what we're saying is we're trying to simulate that we're going somewhere, like a database or somewhere, right? We're making an API call and trying to fetch some user profile. So we're not doing that, right? We're simulating it. And the way we're doing it is we're just doing a task that sleep for 1 second. So basically it's just going to simulate that we're loading for 1 second. Remember, we did the isLoading is true here. So then, right after these, we need to say isLoading is false. So that means we already finished with the call, which in this case, it will just be sleeping for 1 second, right? So, but yeah, before we do that, we're just going to create an outcome variable, and this is going to be at random between 0 and 2. So this is how we're going to manage, we get this state, we get this other state, and then depending on the number, we're going to switch it. And then if it's 0, we're going to have a profile, and then, I'll explain it right now in a second. Now we wrap this in a main actor that run, and that's because when we go to sleep, we're going into a background thread, and then we want to make sure that when we change these variables, that gets done in the main thread, right? We actually come back from the background thread, and then we update all the variables that, can display in the view. We do that in the main thread, so that's why we do this. So yeah, first thing we say isLoading is false because we're finished loading. We already have, our profile or not. Remember, in this case, we're not doing it. We're just slipping. And now we're going to switch the outcome, right? The random number that we got. So if it's 0, we're actually going to have a profile, and we're going to say profile name equals Raul, right? So we have a profile. Everything else stays the same. If it's case 1, we're going to do isEmpty true. So meaning we did not get a profile. There's no profile. So yeah, we're gonna say now you have to change the two variables, right? You need to say isEmpty is true, and make sure that profile name, just in case, make sure that's nil, right? And then default, which will be 2 in this case, will be we're gonna actually have an error, so we're gonna encounter an error. So we're gonna say hasError true, error message equals any random error, right? Network request failed could be one of them, right? And then the profile, again, make sure it's nil. So now, I hope you can see the problem, right? We have to, for all these states, we actually have a whole spaghetti or boolean soup, how I usually like to call it, where we have to keep track of like all the states, and that's not a good thing, right? It's not a good thing. That can become very, very complex, and you can have really complex bugs, right? When you actually have a production app with a lot of code, it can be really hard to actually track them, right? So what are we gonna do, right? So the first thing we're gonna do is, I created a folder called course. So usually inside course, where I usually like to have my views and view models. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna create a view model, right? So we're gonna do Command N, or you can do right click and then new file. So I do Command N, new file, right? Next, and then let's create a profile view model. Right, so that's the first thing we're going to do. So instead of having all the states here, we're actually going to manage our state in our view model, right? So let's create our view model. Right, so the first thing we're going to do, instead of foundation, let's import SwiftUI. And now let's do final class. Let's create our view model, profile view model. Now we're not going to be using observable object. We're going to use the nice macro that SwiftUI has. So that one is called observable, like that, right? And then we're gonna put it in the main actor. So that just means that everything, when we update variables that has to, touch the view or anything like that, right? That all gets done in the main thread. So as you remember, in the view, we're actually doing this main actor that runs. So if we put that, the main actor right here in our view model, then we don't need to do that every time, right? So every variable that gets updated, basically that gets done in the main thread. So that's why we're doing that. Now let's actually create, we're going to create an enum, right? That's going to manage, that's going to have all the different states we have for this view, right? For this little app, basically per view. So we're going to do that right here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do it as an extension of profile view model. So why are we going to do it as an extension? Because this state is not going to be the state for the entire app, right? So right now in this case, it's for the entire app, but you might have like an app with like multiple things and multiple views, and then every view you go to, you have a specific logic, right? So in this case, this loading profile, it's only for this view, right? So in this view, you're trying to load a profile. So the states are not really relevant to like anything else in the app, right? That state is only relevant to these specific views. That's why we're doing it as an extension of the profile view model, right? So what are we gonna do? So we're gonna do an enum called state, and then we're gonna have different cases. So we're gonna have initial. So basically all the cases, we're gonna have initial, we're gonna have loading, we're gonna have loaded, basically when we get a profile, and then when we actually have a profile, we're gonna have it right here. So profile, and we don't have that yet, but we'll create it right now. And then we have another case, empty, another case, failed, that's for the error, and then that's what's going to have the failing message, that's going to be as string, right? Now let's create this profile, right? So usually what I do is I just the same way I create a chord, I create a folder called domain, and here I'll do all the data models, right, that go with the project. So profile, I don't create it in an extension of profile view model, because profile, it is for the entire app, right? A user profile is something that's shared across an entire app, right? It's not like this state, this initial loading loaded with the profile, it's only related to that specific functionality, right? This specific view, right? So let's create a new Swift file. Let's call it profile, right? It's going to be inside the main, and we don't really need to import foundation here. So we're just going to create a struct profile, and then we're going to open this, and this is just going to have a name. So you can just have a profile in the view model like that. It doesn't really need to be a struct in this specific example. I'm just making it like these, so that anything you do, anything you work, anything that you're gonna use to like work on some code, make sure you always use like good principles and good practices, right? So even if right now we only have name, it's really good to put in a struct, because later you might have like 10 different things, right? So you want to make sure you already have it like all, in a really good architecture, so that everything is scalable, right? So now going back to these, now we already have a profile, so that's not going to give an error anymore. So here, what do we do with this, right? So we're going to create a variable. We're going to set var state of type state, and you can say that because it's part of the profile view model. And then we're going to set the initial value to initial, right? And then, right, so, and then I'm going to say private set, because set will be private, right? So you can get this state from the view, but you cannot modify it from the view, right? You can only modify it from the view model. So I do that so that, all the logic. So usually the view, we want to keep it very dumb, right? Only to like show things on the screen. And then all the logic, we want to keep it in the view model, right? So that's why, to force ourselves to not change the state in the view, but we're only going to change it here in our view model, right? All right. So as you can see, now we have one single variable state, right? That's going to be of this type enum. So now we cannot have two different states at the same time, right? So if we set this variable, we start as initial, that's it. We don't need to say loading false, set this to nil, and then empty, false. We don't need to do any of that, right? And then if we change it to loading, then it knows automatically, right? So now that type is going to be loading, right? Everything else does not apply. If we have an error, we're going to set the state of it to fail, right? So everything else will not apply, and things like that, right? And then if it's loaded, you can associate a profile. If it's, fail, you can associate a description for the error message, right? So that's what we're doing. So that already keeps it like really, really good. So something else we can do, right, to just keep it like very nice. Let's say in our view model, something that we can use in our view to make it simpler, we can just do a task is in progress. We can do that for anything, for any other one that we might need. We can just create a computer variable, and we're gonna say if state is loading, where that just means let me see, state that is loading. Oh, we're saying binary operator cannot be applied. Yeah, right. So we need to make it conform to equatable, right? So the way I'm going to do it, I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to do extension profile view model at state. and it's not we don't need it to be identifiable. So let's do equatable, and let's put it right here. I usually like to put it separate because this is how usually Apple does it. And then if we need to do anything, it will be like inside, right? It will be here, and then if we have more, it'll be like separate, right? It'll not be like everything in like the enum. So, you know, and whatever it's inside here is whatever you need to make it conform to these. If you conform to something else, let's say codable or identifiable, then that logic will be inside of that. So everything will be, you know, very refactor and really clean. So here it's just complaining because we have in this enum, we have another type profile, and profile does not conform to equatable. So let's actually do that. Let's go to profile. It's going to be this one right here. And let's do extension profile, and let's make it conform to equatable. Let's just open, and that's it, right? That should go away in a second. Let's go to our view model, and now we're good. So now that we have, now we can have this, right? So task is in progress. It's just basically the same as state is loading, right? And you can have multiple conditions, right? In case you want to. So these, you can access it really neatly, right? Instead of in the view saying if state is loading, you can just say, you know, you can just have this nice, oh, if a task is in progress, and then the logic, you will put it here in the view model really easily, right? So what else are we gonna do? Let's actually implement our load profile. Let's actually open here, editor pane on the right, and then here we're gonna have our view, right? So let's get rid of the canvas really quickly. Now this load profile is gonna get simplified a lot, and you're gonna see that right now. Let's put it in our view model instead of our view. So we're gonna say load profile, and what are we doing? Let's just start the task, right? The task that we're doing right here. And now instead of doing all of these, right, the only thing we need to do is we're going to say state that loading, right? So state is going to be loading, right, when we start. That's the first thing we do. Now, we don't need to set it. We don't need to do it, you know, it's loading true and then false. We just set the state. Now the state of this view is just loading, right? It's trying to load the profile. So now let's do our logic, right? So let's copy these. Try to wait to like sleep for like a second. Let's actually copy our outcome right here. And now let's do, let's actually do it again so that we can, you know, we can start fresh. Right. So now let's switch. Let's make the switch. Remember, we don't need to do this main actor.run because we have this main actor right here. So let's switch on the outcome, and let's see if this I can actually make it. Not really, but well, we can do K0. And then we're doing state equals. Remember, now we don't need to, you know, do anything, you know, set like a string or anything. So we just do a state that is loaded, meaning the state now changed from loading to loaded. And now this will expect a profile. So we can just say, you know, .init, let's create a new profile, and then let's just say Raul, right? Just for the sake of the example, let's just use the same one. Now, case 1, right? So for case 1, what did we have here, right? So case 1 means no profile, right? It's empty. So now we can just say state, you know, same thing, state that it's empty, and that'll be all, right? So we don't need to make sure the profile name is nil, because the profile would only exist if we're in loaded, right? If we set it to empty, that's it. Like this does not exist at all. So that's all we need to do. And then in the default, which is basically like 2, you can just say case 2. We're gonna say state equals that failed, and then these will ask for a message, right? So we can just say that's right here, network request fail, and then we can have it right here. So this is really nice because in this case we had multiple, right? We had a variable, a boolean, hasError, we had an error message, and we had to make sure there was no profile, right, to display the error. Because then we had like an if-let, you know, if, else if, and then if we have, you know, let's say we have an error, but there's something, you know, in any other variable, like it's loading, it's going to show these, right? It's not going to get to these. So here we don't have to make sure of any of that, right? Because we're setting the state. When we set it to something, the other value just gets lost, right? So basically we're saying state fail, and then we pass in the message. And we have it all into like one single state that failed, right? And you can have multiple, right? You can have multiple things into like each states, and then you can, of course, expand it really neatly. So that's basically all the logic we need, right? So now let's go to our view. Let's actually now put the view right here. And here we'll do the view model. So let's move this one a little bit so that we have more space. So then in our view, so now what are we actually doing here? What's changing, right? So now this load profile, we can get rid of it. So it's not good to have logic like that in the view. So, that's going to be in our view model. We don't need that. Now this button right here, let's refactor it and put it here in a function, in a separate variable, right? So let's do reload, well, not reload, it'll be load, profile, right? Load profile, let's call it view, on view, right? Right, there we go. And then this whole button right here, right? Yeah, let's take all of these and let's put it here. So that way, this is a little bit more simplified. So load profile view would just be right here. And now for the action, we just got to change it to view model, right? View model that load profile. So now instead of in the view, it'll be using the one from the view model. Now, why is saying this, right? Because right now we don't have any reference to our view model, right? So now actually that we're here, let's get rid of our spaghetti, right? We don't need this anymore. Now let's do add state, right? To create a reference to our view model, private var, and let's say view model. And this, we're just gonna create an instance of our view model, profile view model, right? So now we can say view model dot whatever, right? We can use things now in our view model. So now this will work, right? We're using the function in our view model to do that. And now, what's up with these now, right? So we need to, let's actually, make some space here and let's refactor that, right? So now, instead of just doing an if, else if, which will, if we do that, we have to make sure, right? Because let's say we have an error and then some of these we haven't reset, you have to make sure, because in order to get to here, right, it needs to go through all of these, right? So all of these need to be false. So that's why you need to manage like a bunch of stuff, right? So let's actually make it neatly, right? Let's do a switch, view model, right? View model that state. And if you enter that, now we can just really cleanly switch the view model that state. And now we're going to have all of the states, right? So initial, loading, loaded, empty, and failed. So of course, if it's initial, we're going to cut this and we're going to put it here. If it's loading, we're going to cut that, we're going to put it here. If it's loading, if it's loaded, we're going to put it here. And this profile, it's the one we use here, that profile, right? And these profile, we need to do profile.name, right? So if it's empty, when I get this, we're going to put it right here. And if it has some kind of error, we're going to put it here. And these will be the message we're going to be passing in, right? There we go. So now I can just get rid of this ugly if statements. And now this is what we're going to have, right? And this is really neatly, and you can refactor it further, right? You can get, all of these things, you can put them into their own view, right? So this will be like initial view, and the same thing we did here, right? Put it into its own like variables, right? So you can refactor it. This you can put in a view, but basically all of it, right? Because right now you have one line or a couple lines, but you might have more, and you want this to be as clean as possible, right? Like here we have a lot of stuff already. So yeah, and as you do more, this will grow a lot. So yeah, it's better if you refactor it into its own variables and all that. So I'll leave that as a homework to you. So as of now, yeah, we've fixed the problem. Right now it's like all, very neatly. You have view model that state, and then you have, initial, loading, loaded, empty, fail, and fail. So basically now if you want to add a different state, right, all you need to do is here in this enum state, just add a different one. You need maybe, I don't know, like initial 2, initial 2. That's it. That's all you need. And then when you have that initial 2, all you need to do is here you need to provide, a different case for, it's gonna complain. Then you create initial 2, and that's it. And then of course, when you're in one state, you cannot be in another. So the view, you're managing the view with a state, right? And that state has all the information you need, right? So if it's loading, maybe it doesn't need any information, but if it's loaded, right, it needs a profile. If it's an error state, you need, of course, the message so you can show it. So yeah, let's delete that. And let me actually show you how that works. Yeah, actually we can close this one, and then let's open up the canvas. So you can see how this works. So you see, tap the button to load the profile. Now, if we tap the button, you see how it loads? It says loading. So it changed the state to loading, and then seems like the random number fell into the one that actually has a profile. So it says hello Raul, right? So now if you tap it again, hopefully you get something different. You see, so now we got the one with the error. Something went wrong, right? And that's that view right here, the content unavailable. Actually, this one. And then you see the message will be this one right here, network request failed. And now you load it again. Yeah, now we got a profile. Let's see if we get it to be empty. Yeah, this is the empty state, no profile found, and then the SO symbol that we put in, right? So as you can see, we start in the initial state, and then depending on, we can keep loading the profile, and then we change our states, and then everything gets done really easily. No need for the spaghetti. And you can see this especially when you start, adding more things to the app, and the app becomes really big, right? With multiple views and each view has different states. And maybe instead of loading a profile, you're loading 20 different things, right? Because maybe you have a settings, you're loading profile, you're loading settings, you're loading more things. So when this becomes more, you have a bunch of data and a bunch of stuff going on in the view model and services and stuff like that, there's when you need it the most. Because you don't want to deal with this as spaghetti, right? And then maybe you have a bug, and then you have to make sure in all states and everything you do, you update every single variable. So this is a really clean way of doing it, right? With good architecture, and then just following these patterns, you'll be okay. All right, so I hope this video was very useful to you. So if you like more, please take a second, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye, take care.